Hey everyone, you're listening to Ordinary Effort. This episode is an extended conversation with Jeff Snider, the host of the Locked On Dodgers podcast. In this episode, we talked to Jeff about what it was like podcasting about the Dodgers during their 2024 World Series run and what goes into MVP votings every year. If you like this episode, follow us on Instagram, Blue Sky, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. And also, if you like talking baseball and playing Immaculate Grid, join our Discord. The link is in the description. We play Immaculate Grid almost every night of the week. Check out the link in the description and hope you enjoy this episode.
Jeff, we gotta point out the bobblehead collection behind you. Tell us a little bit about that for people watching.
Yeah, yeah, I love bobbleheads. I was a Dodger season ticket holder for about a decade, and the Dodgers do a ton of bobblehead giveaways. So I've got all of them that they gave away during my 10 years as season ticket holder, which is probably well over 100 for sure. And then I've got a few from before I was a season ticket holder, a few from the years since, and then some from other stadiums from different sources. But yeah, I haven't even counted, but there's probably 160 or so bobbleheads behind me that just what's the point of having an office if you can't have it covered
Yeah.
floor to ceiling with bobbleheads?
Yeah, that's awesome. I've got a Garrett Cole bobblehead somewhere, and I'll display him based on how the team is doing. If they're really struggling, he's face down. I mean, it's really how I'm feeling about it. So
Yeah, I just my mine are stationary. They're win or lose all the time, but luckily
yeah,
the Dodgers usually keep me pretty happy.
yeah.
What is that life like? Because I'm not that familiar with this. We get like once every 7 years.
Oh yeah, and I have nothing but respect for the Mets. They did a good job this year. I really like
Mhm.
Carlos Mendoza as a manager. I think
Yeah.
that Mets are in a good place. Obviously, we'll see what happens with them in free agency this offseason, but hopefully they can make you a little bit happier here in the next little while.
I gotta say the season was way more fun than I was expecting it to be, and then it seemed to be shaping up early on. So
Even
I'm
late on, like you
yeah.
you wouldn't have guessed in mid-August that they were going to play in the
Mhm.
NLCS.
No, I mean I never assume anything with them, like because I know better than that. But yeah, I mean that was a fun ride. And it was a rough end, but it was a fun ride.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, speaking of we mentioned you host Locked On Dodgers. Obviously, your analysis of the games, just the season. What was that like hosting that during this playoff run and then ultimately the World Series?
Yeah, it's always more fun podcasting about a winning team for sure. And it was, but there's ups and downs, and Dodger fans because the fact is they've won two World Series now and during
Mhm.
this 12-year stretch, but that means they haven't won the World Series 10 times when they got our hopes up and then didn't. And I think every time it doesn't happen, including twice when they went to the World Series and lost. And there are a lot of people who just aren't ready to be hurt again. And so they hurt themselves in anticipation of being hurt. And so every loss, it's just like, we're the worst team ever. Dave Roberts, fire him into the sun. It's just awful. And so, our job was almost like therapists and being like, okay, we're still up 3 games to 1 in the World Series, right? Like, you realize that the Yankees scoring 5 runs off of Brent Honeywell doesn't actually mean that much about how the next 3 games are going to go, right? And then there was also in the Padres series, things did look kind of bleak. When the Dodgers went down 2 games to 1, it was like, this again, because the Dodgers have been knocked out by NL West opponents the last 2 years, and just it was like, oh, not again. And so keeping positive for that part was a challenge, but it's all worth it in the end when we get to spend all off season referring to ourselves as the World Series champions. And you know what? All next year too, until somebody else wins a World Series, the
It's
Dodgers
true.
are the World Series champs.
Very true. Well said. You mentioned you were a season ticket holder for years. So, I mean, you've probably seen some, I think you mentioned when we recorded, you've seen a perfect game get broken up. What are some of the memorable games you've been at Dodger Stadium for?
Yeah, so yeah, the perfect game that was broken up was at whatever the Giants Stadium was called in
Okay.
2013. It was the Giants D-backs. But at Dodger Stadium, I was there. My first game as a season ticket holder was opening day 2013 when Clayton Kershaw pitched a complete game shutout and hit the
Oh.
only home run of his career uh, to break up a nothing nothing tie in the 8th inning. So
Oh
That
man.
was a good one. I was there for Max Muncy's home run in the 18th inning of Game 3 of the 2018 World Series, longest World Series game ever. I was there with my two sons and my dad and my uncle, and in the eighth inning, I think it was when the Red Sox tied the game up. My son, who was 7 at the time, turned to me and said, "Dad, if this goes to extras, are we staying?" I said, "Yes." I said, "Okay." And so I had to keep, cheering up. But once we got to the point where it was officially the longest World Series game ever, then the boys were totally on board. They're like, "Let's last forever." I told them,
Yeah.
I said, "Someday you're going to be watching the World Series with your sons, and a game will go to like the 12th inning, and it'll pop up on the screen and say the longest World Series game in history was Game 3 of 2018." And you'll tell your kids, "I was there and I stayed for the whole thing." And
Yeah.
so that,
I don't know if we're gonna get anywhere near that with the
Oh.
Ghost Runner
oh, they don't do
now with
Ghost
this.
Runner in the
Oh, that's
postseason.
right.
Playoffs, they take it out. Thank
Yeah.
gosh.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna put my foot down on this. If the rule does not stand when the playoffs start, it shouldn't
Yeah.
exist at all.
We
If
we
you're gonna
can't do
put
this when the games matter.
right, yeah, no,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't like it. I don't
Why would
like
we do
it.
this
Yeah.
stupid things in real games? So
It's a horrible
Yeah,
rule, yeah.
Spike Owen's real given name was Spike.
you've got to be
Spike
kidding
Okay.
me.
That's the other thing we're
Spike
gonna look
D
up.
Owen.
Yeah.
No
DEE is his
way.
middle name.
Oh,
Oh
Yeah.
man.
just a quick callback. I threw Jose Morales in for Dodgers A's. 0.009%.
Oh
Yeah.
shit.
Oh
Well, because
wow.
he
Talk
had
about
six total games with the
you
A's.
might
So
be the
that
only
Yeah.
person who put him on. I mean, like,
Yeah, you that might be the
yeah.
first one ever to use him. So
Yeah. Jeff, I kind
it's
of had a question. We haven't asked others yet, but sometimes like, we've been doing the show now for like 9 months. We'll get people messaging us like, "Oh, I want to do something like this too." I mean, you've been now the host of Locked On Dodgers for 5 years. Sort of what's that like for you as like a creator, like a podcast host? Like what's your favorite part? Kind of what's a day in the life?
a day in the life is mostly spent wondering where the money's going to come from.
Yeah.
Uh, no, yeah, I
Yeah.
love podcasts. I love talking baseball and being able to do it, into a microphone and talk to people who aren't in the same room as me is a lot of fun. I've been podcasting about the Dodgers for nine seasons now. It was
Mm.
early in the 2016 season that my co-host Vince and I started. We originally did a weekly podcast called the Scully Avenue Podcast. It was right around the time that Los Angeles renamed the street that Dodger Stadium is on to Vince Scully Avenue. And so we were at Scully Avenue Podcast. And then after about 3 years of that, David Locke, who owns the Locked On Podcast Network, reached out to me and he said, "Hey, do you want to start doing it 5 days a week and change the name?" And I said, "Nope." And he said, "Pretty please." And I said, "Okay." So we started doing that. So yeah, we just finished our 6th season doing Locked On Dodgers, but it's so much fun. Like, because I'm going to be watching the games anyway. I'm going to be thinking about all this
Mhm.
stuff anyway. It really is like, not that I don't have to do any work for the podcast. I do, have to pay attention in different ways and things, but it really is in a lot of ways like this. You guys, you're going to be doing the grid anyway. You might as well,
Mhm.
do it on camera and talk about it.
Yeah.
It's like when you can do something like that where it's just something you really enjoy watching and talking about. It's a lot of fun.
that was pretty much how our conversations went when we're talking about starting this. We had a group chat on WhatsApp, just a bunch of guys from our fantasy league, and we were just sharing our grids every day. And then somebody said the phrase grid team, and I was like, yeah, let's do that. Like let's do the grids together. And nobody really picked up on it except Josh. And so like said it again, nobody picked up on it. And so I texted Josh on the side. I was like, okay, but like for real, if would you want to like make this a thing? And he's like, yeah. So that's kind of how this came about. I actually have a question. So like you said you're watching the game in different ways. What are some of the differences in the way you would watch the game as just an everyday fan versus how you're watching it now as a podcast host?
Yeah, it's more just I I'm trying to think how to word it. Like basically, I need to remember stuff when the game is done. As a
Mhm.
fan, I can just be like, "Hey, Dodgers won, sweet, that was fun. That was fun to watch." But now it's like, whether it's making actual notes or making mental notes of, the in the 4th inning there was this good base running play that's probably not going to get mentioned anywhere, but I want to mention that on the podcast because it stood out to me. Things like that, just trying to spot things and more to the point, remember them after the game is over so that I can talk about them. I guess that's the main thing. It's just the knowing that I'm going to have to or get to, depending on how you look at it, talk about this when the game's over. I'm gonna pay closer attention to the little things and try to remember them when the game's over.
That that like reminds me of when I would read pretty much anything in college and I would highlight the text and I would start out like, okay, I'm just going to highlight the key words. But then I was like, well, I don't know, which of these things are going to be important. And by the end, I'd be highlighting almost every line. And I'm like, this is pointless. Like I
And you
might
don't
as well.
remember any of
Right.
it.
Yeah. No. Yeah. But I could see that being, I mean, in my mind, if I was watching at that level, I feel like I would have a list of notes for myself. Like I don't know that I would trust myself to just mentally tab every single thing that happened. I'd probably have like the yarn on like a board behind me and like connecting all these things. Like this
Yeah.
happened in this inning, and then later on in the game it came into, I don't know.
Yeah, and one of the nice things is we do our show isn't really a recap show. We're not like, hey, come listen to us to find out what happened in the game. It's more we kind of go into assuming everybody listening to us also watched the game or at least knows
Mhm.
what the final score was, so we're not uh in the fourth inning this happened and then in the fifth inning this happened. And so we are kind of more it's like picking two or three things out of a game that you know
Mm.
overall big picture, yeah, we know the Dodgers won 7-4, but here are the specific things we want to talk about that wouldn't tell you the whole story of the game, but the kind of things that you might call your buddy the next day. Hey, did you see the Dodger game last night? Did you notice that Andy Pott is a professional ball player and still hasn't learned how to slide? Like things like that you're going to talk about with your buddies. That's basically what the podcast is. It's talking Dodgers, with our buddies.
Do you
That's
guys have
awesome.
like do you have like a group chat, like a group text kind of thing going, like a anything like
N-
that?
I mean, Vince, my co-host, and I will sometimes text each other, during the game. Okay, we definitely need to talk about that.
Mm.
Because it is funny how quick things fly out of your head. You have
Mm.
11 things to talk about, and then as soon as it's time to talk about it, you're like, okay, what were those things? So sometimes I will text Vince if there's something specific, and even more in the off season. It's like, oh, 8 a.m. I see some news. I know we're not recording till 9 o'clock tonight. There's no way I'm gonna remember this thought, so I'll just shoot him a text really quick, and then it's easy to pull back up. But since it's just the two of us, there's not. Although I do have like, you know, we have like an insiders group, people who can text us, and so that's kind of fun. They'll text us during the day, so oh yeah, we should definitely talk about it. So I'll just put a little star next to
Mm.
that, and so yeah, it's kind of a a lot of different one-on-one conversations that I kind of draw on to figure out what to talk about.
Yeah.
How does the off season look for you? Like if you're obviously not rehashing the previous game from the night before, like is it like do you find that you get pulled into like the speculation stories of like, oh, where is, Juan Soto gonna sign, or last year it was Otani, like is it a lot of that, or like what other kinds of things do you kind of gravitate to in the off season?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of free agency talk, and we try not to like obviously sometimes a rumor comes up and so okay, let's talk about this today. And obviously when somebody actually signs, okay, well, Juan Soto is off the board, or whoever. Um, but there's awards, Yet last night I talked about uh Shohei Ohtani shockingly being one of the finalists for NL MVP.
Hmm.
But I also talked about Dave Roberts not being one of the finalists for Manager of the Year, and what is Manager of the Year? How come
Mm.
everybody who wins it ends up fired within 2 years? All those things. So, and then so there's awards. Next week they'll be handing out the awards, and so we will, dig into when Shohei Ohtani does win the MVP. We'll talk more about that. And today we had Silver Sluggers announced, so we'll probably talk about that tonight on the show. And yeah, there's so much going on, especially for the Dodgers. They're always every free agent is either linked to the Dodgers actually or linked to the Dodgers through leaks by his agent so that
Mm.
to drive up the price with other
Yep.
teams. And
Yep.
so as a Dodgers podcast, there's never any shortage of free
Mm.
agency and trade rumors to talk about.
I gotta ask because you obviously Otani is the guy. Um, What are your thoughts as a if you were to take your fandom out of it, MVP voting? Because I know that there was some chatter, probably towards like later in the season, where Francisco Lindor was really carrying the Mets, right? And the conversation generally, at least what I would see was like Ohtani, the Dodgers without Ohtani would be fine. The Mets without Lindor would be a dumpster fire. And people were saying that that should weigh into the MVP voting. Obviously, historically, Ohtani had the most ridiculous season we've ever seen, probably ever. Is that fair? Like, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean, what are your feelings and thoughts on like how the MVP voting goes? Because it seems like just an offensive kind of award at this point.
yeah. I think MVP is an individual award, and so to take into account a player's teammates is silly. So,
Hmm.
the everybody else on the Mets sucks. So Francisco Lindor should win the MVP. Seems like a silly argument to me. For me, MVP is who was the best baseball player. And I think I was just saying on my podcast last night, I'm glad that WAR isn't perfect yet. I think the idea of wins above replacement is perfect. It tries to quantify all the different ways a player can contribute, or opposite of contribute, detribute, anti-tribute to a team. Let's add all that together and see exactly how valuable this guy was. If they could actually do that perfectly, I think that would be the perfect stat. I'm glad that they can't. And the way they can't is there's three different versions. They don't even agree with each other.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but so that's good that there's debate, but the debate should be who was the best baseball player, because that's what most valuable means. It does, if you look at and because like what Mike, what you were saying, it goes both ways, because back when A-Rod won it for a
I was
last
just
place
gonna
team,
say, yeah.
people are
mm,
like, well, they would have been in last place with or without him. How valuable could he have been?
yeah,
And the opposite of that is Ohtani. Well, Dodgers would have been in first place with or without him. How valuable? When also you look at Ohtani had 9 wins above replacement. The Dodgers won the division by 5 games, so
Yeah.
they wouldn't have been in first place without Shohei Ohtani.
mm,
And the Mets might have still gotten a wild card spot. I guess probably not, since they had to. No, because them and the Braves both ended up in there, right? So, yeah,
yeah. But
you
I
know,
mean, they had the same record. Braves won the tiebreaker, so the Mets had the lowest seed.
yeah.
And
But
I
that's why
think,
it's so crazy to start getting into that. Like, well, what would the teams be without them? Well, we don't know. What we
yeah,
know
Yeah.
is how well did the player play. The MVP award should always go to the baseball player who played baseball the best. And
It's
there's
that
plenty of
word. Yeah.
debate within that of who that was, because there's absolutely arguments to be had about, well, Ohtani didn't have to play defense.
mhm,
How much value does Lindor's defense bring? And yeah, it is a
Mhm.
lot of value. That's why Lindor was, almost as valuable as Ohtani. And almost, we probably, after that last month, we have to put it in air quotes, because Ohtani ran away with the thing. In
Yeah.
August, it was a legitimate conversation you could have. Okay, Lindor has been almost as valuable because of the defense difference. By the end, Ohtani was so much better offensively than
Yeah.
Lindor and everybody else that it would be crazy to vote for anybody else this year. But there's a reason Ohtani is going to be the first DH ever to win the MVP, because you have to be so much better than everybody else offensively to make up for the fact that you're not providing any value on defense.
I mean,
Yeah.
50-50 season will do it, I
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's that word. People get hung up on the word valuable. I remember when A-Rod won and people were up in arms about it. And it's like it's a good debate. I feel like I think what bothers me sometimes is that you can tell the sports writers like view it differently, how they vote kind of thing. And I feel like I wish there was like, as just a total fan who sits on my couch, like more guidance of like how we should. Because I'm with you, Jeff. I think like it makes sense to give it to the player who had like the best season. I think that it's like these votes are so subjective that it gets frustrating to see it play out. I mean,
And I think that there are ways that a player can bring value other than his play on the field. I just don't think any of the 30 people voting for MVP have much insight into those things. So,
hmm,
and I also think those might be tiebreakers, like Miguel Rojas for the Dodgers was super valuable as a veteran presence in the locker room and a team leader and all that stuff. You'd have to exaggerate that a whole lot to think that he was
yeah,
the most valuable player in the league. But yeah, I mean, if you had two guys who, very similar stats qualitatively,
Hmm.
they had very similar seasons, and one of them is a great clubhouse guy and the other guy isn't,
Hmm.
just to pick random names, if you want to say like a Miguel Rojas or a Manny Machado, hypothetically speaking, you know, um, yeah, give it to the better clubhouse guy, but only as a
Yeah.
tiebreaker. Like, and I think that's where, and even like Lindor, I love Francisco Lindor. I wish Francisco Lindor was a Dodger.
Mm.
Um, but like people had to exaggerate his defense a whole lot. It wasn't even Lindor's best defensive season. He was just a good defensive shortstop this year.
Hmm.
And it was kind of just grasping and people were really looking for that. Well, that clutch stuff. And it's like, I remember when he hit the home run to break up the no-hitter off that Blue Jays pitcher with three names,
Yeah.
whatever his name.
Francis Bowden, or
Oh yeah, that's right.
yeah, yeah,
And people are like, see, that's why Lindor's the MVP. I'm like, it's the ninth inning, and Bowden was throwing a no hitter. Where was Lindor the first 8 innings of the game? Like
yeah,
things like that. Like you pick these moments and you cherry pick these moments, and that's why it makes more sense. Just look at the season as a whole, because then you can see, oh look, Francisco Lindor hit that one big home run. I don't know if you noticed, Shohei Ohtani hit 54 home runs.
hmm,
And
Lindor hit a couple more big ones.
yeah, and I'm not saying
No,
I'm not saying that's the only argument for Lindor. I'm just
I
saying
yeah,
know.
that when you're cherry picking one moment,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, well, okay, Otani had the walk-off grand slam against the Rockies. Boom, there. We just tied the home run to break up a no-hitter. What's next? And why do
yeah,
these individual moments pitting them against each other when you just look and see, oh, yeah, Otani was a much better hitter than Lindor this year. Obviously, Lindor had more defensive value, but not enough to make up the gap.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a solid point. Yeah.
And I'm not just a homer, because I said the same thing last year when, at the end of August of 2023, Mookie Betts and Ronald Acuna were neck and neck for MVP. And at that point I was saying, I might give it to Betts at this point because he plays better defense at a more important position. And so the offense is very close. And so the defense probably gives Mookie the award.
Mm.
And then Mookie had a lousy September and Acuna had a great September. And by the end of the season, I said, well, yeah, obviously Acuna is the MVP. And I said this
Mhm.
on our show this year in August. I said, September is what's going to be what determines who wins it. And what we saw was Otani had a great September, and Lindor was hurt for part of September, and not his best month, and so Otani ran away with it, just like Acuna did the year before. And so the defense, just like Acuna, much less defensive value than Mookie Betts in 2023, but he was enough better offensively that it didn't matter. Same thing in reverse this year with Otani, with the Dodger being the one who deserved it because of the being much better offensively.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do
Um,
have a hard time removing my fandom a little bit. Like I understand it and everything you're saying is valid. I just like that there's that part of me that gets hooked by like, yeah, but Lindor.
The, and the problem with storylines is you watch Mets games, and
Yeah.
so you
yeah.
Yeah.
notice these.
That's
I
yeah.
watch Dodger games, so I notice Otani's moments. I notice Mookie's moments. And so
Yeah.
that's why you do need stats to say, okay, remove the emotion, remove the exhilaration of the moment, remove the fandom, and say, oh, you look at the numbers. Yeah, Otani was much better than everybody else in the league offensively, and yeah, by plenty to make him the MVP.
It's
Yeah,
crazy
no.
too. Like, I mean, I think the way social media, like to your point, I remember when he broke up the no-hitter and everyone was losing their mind on Twitter about it. I think I even texted Mike and was like, we should put out a Lindor reel because everyone's talking about it, right? But I think like what gets lost in that like scuffle is that Lindor will probably finish like MVP two in the voting, and you've got to have an incredible season to finish second in the MVP voting, especially to a guy who put up a season that we've never seen before. It's like, we get so polarized on the like who's going to win it that, I'm thinking on the AL side, like Bobby Witt Jr. had the most ridiculous year ever. Like, and I hope I'm a Yankees fan, obviously. I think Aaron Judge is going to walk away with the MVP, but I hope people remember Bobby Witt's year because we might not see something like it again. It was just special.
Yeah, and I don't like these arguments for that reason. And same with Hall of Fame. It's like if
Yeah,
you're saying somebody doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame, that doesn't mean you think they were a terrible player.
right.
It
Yeah.
means you think they were almost good enough to be in the Hall of Fame, which is, kind of the
Yeah.
second nicest thing you can say about a player,
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
there's no shame in finishing second in the MVP voting. and being the second best player in the league. And
Yeah.
again, I would love to have Francisco Lindor on the Dodgers. I'm hoping the Mets tank again,
I
but
don't think Mike would love that as much, but I
yeah.
think one thing I want to mention before we close it out is, I feel like these conversations you mentioned when we recorded DodgerYard.com, and I feel like this must be the kind of stuff that people talk about. Like we have a Discord channel where we started, and we'll drop the link in our in the show description, and people are just talking baseball all day, whether it's like grid or they're talking about baseball stadiums they've been to, players they met, just memories. But you mentioned Dodger Yard, and I feel like we're hoping this episode reaches some Dodger fans. Like, tell us a little more about that and maybe where people can find you and engage there.
Yeah, it's just at dodgeryard.com, and the goal is try kind of to make it like all these social media platforms that are owned by someone else, and it's like if Twitter dies, then all of your Twitter friends go away, and if
Hmm.
you quit Facebook, then you quit all your Facebook groups you're in, or whatever. uh Discord, even, Discord's
Hmm.
pretty popular these days. But there's also like the Discord can be kind of overwhelming sometimes, because
Hmm.
it's like, wow, there's a lot going on here. I don't have time to read all that. So what we're trying to build at Dodgy Yard is just a place where people can come, where it's one place, and the only purpose of this is to talk about the Dodgers. And yeah, there's kind of like in Discord, you got the different areas, different things you can talk about, but it's basically owned by Dodger fans, run by Dodger fans, and designed for Dodger fans to talk about the Dodgers. And we don't have to worry about the politics of who owns it, or
Hmm.
the government overreach, or anything like that that all social media is susceptible to. This is just a place to come talk about the Dodgers and have these discussions or arguments or debates or whatever you want to call them. But from a standpoint of, man, I love the Dodgers.
Yeah. Man, if I was a Dodgers fan, that's a good sell. I probably won't buy
Hey, it's
myself
not too late,
there,
Josh.
but I mean, we'll see what happens next season.
We all
Uh,
make choices in life, Josh.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, well, Jeff, thanks again. You can check Jeff on Locked On Dodgers. Obviously, in DodgerYard.com, you'll probably find me there too. And yeah, it's been a blast.
Yeah, let's do it again sometime.